Hi, I'm Seamless, and it is time for a new How to Synth tutorial. And today I'm going to show you how to get full spectrum brass out of Sytrus and a patcher with some stuff in it after the fact. And this is what it sounds like. Alright, so as you can see, there are multiple colors engaged instead of just using one. I actually have it set in mono right now. I'm not sure how it did poly just then. That's weird, because I'm not playing because I clicked it with a different sound. Derp. But point is, there's a filter action in here, and in order to get this to be individual per voice and also to have more than one light voice at a time, you need to use different colors. There's a particular consequence to this, which is that on top of using unison, this means that it's playing entirely different copies of the same synth, and that creates a somewhat of a CPU tax if you're doing complicated enough things that you require oversampling. And this particular instrument definitely does, because it uses a lot of high frequency, high density FM to get to do the job that it does. So let's break down how the job is done. On the top, we have this patcher. Now, I would normally have done this all in one patcher, but I actually had to take the Sytrus out of patcher in order to solve a particular problem, which is that patcher, no matter what you tell whatever plugin inside it, like what to do with velocity, it has its own ideas about what the channel should be doing vis-a-vis velocity. And that means that no matter even if I tell it not to care about velocity to literal volume, unless I tell it to by way of making it my own thing, it'll still just add actually like adjust the level of things. So I needed that outside its own deal so that it would not do that. So I used everything else that was going to happen in there to be just what in this patcher, which is just the air consideration. This is what it sounds like without the patcher. And here it is again with it. Yeah. So let's undetach this. It's starting to get annoying. There we go. All right. Alrighty. So clearly there's convolvers going on. There's compression, post EQ, and then there's a bit of dry. Here's just the dry going in the compression. That's the full room consideration. I basically have a short and a long. The size difference is imperceptible a bit because if you're in here with the keyboard shortcut engaged, you can Alt F, and that will do a fade out actually. There's Control F will do a fade in, but fade out, it makes the sample shorter. Sample length is equivalent to the length of the reverb in the case of convolution. So that's how I controlled for time. There's the stretching ability, but that also changes the spectral reality a little bit. And making this work out well was a whole lot of like point by point alterations of stuff and utilizing the self convolution and a bit of stretching too to get it to just sound okay with the content. Like I originally was going to try and go full modeling-ish with this and try and do all convolution and like not have any of the dry synthesis actually involved in the final signal so that like you get the most actual realistic sort of brassy experience as possible. And that might still be something I do in the future, but that didn't quite work out this time. Still had to, like, in order to get it to work out. And part of the reason why that's true is because some of the texture I got in the bare synthesis is actually part of the room. I integrated in the tone in part of my target getting the tone to feel right in the synth with the way that a brass instrument sounds in a room. Not like like if we were to actually get the naked, driest possible synthesis of what a brass instrument sounds like. Which probably doesn't sound like we expect it to. But when it interacts with the stuff that it interacts with in the room to get the reverb it does to make it sound the way it does to us, then all of a sudden it does. But I was a lot farther from that from my source, even though I still had to get some more air for it to add at the beginning of the end. So along with a whole bunch of individual things triggered at once just to get this texture to feel right together, you can see there's a lot of velocity action. There's also a whole bunch of modulation X action, and that's where you see some of these extra slide notes engaged. This is doing that swell. I could automate this with an automation curve if I felt like it, but it could also just do this with MIDI because you can do that in FL. And since I have this thing out here in naked land, I might as well. It's essentially moving this parameter, and I have that link to the relevant stuff in here that controls for the tone that we're experiencing. So let's talk about how we're doing this tone, right? I began with a plan that did not work the way that I wanted it to, that worked later in later experiments, but that happened in this time to lead us just to sounding like brass. And then I spent the rest of the choices trying to just angle it farther and farther in that direction. So the beginning plan was to have two oscillators. They were both sine waves at the beginning that were phased against each other so that you couldn't hear them if nothing was happening to them. And then to modulate one of them so that what we would be hearing is just the differences caused just by the FM effect and have none of the source. The desire to do this is part of moving it. Was not just the FM involved, but also moving the phase itself. And there's a lot of that going on in here. And this is part of why this sounds as good as it does. This is pretty much the first step of making something sound realistic, is understanding that, like, because now we're talking physical modeling. We have to care about why a brass instrument is it. And part of it, it's all, you know, the instrument, the material, blah, 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 but it's also a person's face interacting with it, what the tongue is doing, why that's creating a harmonic, what the real relationship is with the oscillation in this example. And what that is actually just a rapid change in phase. And all the like tonal adjustments a person can make with their face to cause changes in tone in a brass instrument is altering the relationship with phase with the instrument and also their own body. And mimicking that is mostly about causing articulations that basically mean a change in phase. And a lot of so there's a lot of volume change as well, because when you change, like they're actually different in these first two oscillators, because later, like, my plan for why this is the way this is actually had to do with making strings, had nothing to do with being brass. But I did not do this the way that meant that it turned into what this became. I had better luck with what I wanted to do the other way, but there's reasons why this didn't work out. But it's so far away from where this went to turn into how this became what it is. Because so the volume automation is also on all of them. So and they're all very strange and different parameters and doing weird things. This one is so low, it's basically an LFO on phase on 3. It's not even really an FM, and it's being RM'd though by an actual full rate oscillator, and that effect, and changing it and changing it and changing it and changing it, like all these changes being different. I'm explaining what the changes are, but it really just matters that they exist and that they're different. It's not just 6 oscillators operating one thing and you can change them and you can hear the changes and that's the end of it. They have to be changing different things that change in a way that doesn't interrupt the change you just made, so that you can still hear them. And on top of that, on top of moving phase, and there's this big, huge, plucky volume thing on one it was a higher oscillator, but like that's what's making that initial feeling kind of be a thing. And what that kind of experience is that, like, when you open your mouth and you breathe in an air and you hold in air, you are a size. And then when you blow that air out to make a note happen, you change your size to do this, and this creates a phase change. And that little bit is like, and then you even out on the air that you have left that you can lean on to push out at a certain pressure. Like, really good musicians know how to not do that, or at least know how to control for it, and use it to do impressive things. But knowing this about it means that if I want it to sound realistic, I have to solve for that. I have to have that quality in there. And it's an interesting thought, isn't it? This guy's FMing number 5 here is FMing number 4, when this is the one that's being RM'd by the big guy. So and it's big guy because it's the same pitch, but any increase in complexity and angular nature of a shape means that it has highish frequencies involved. Like, just look at what this looks like. Like that's a lot of that. That's a lot of high frequency stuff. It's very dense. And I just screwed with it. So let's put it back in real life and then do this again. So what's fun about this action? This is normally the making a waveform this sharp means having a lot of high frequencies. But what I actually wanted to do was, because that's too sharp and harsh, I want to bring it down and smooth it out. But here's the thing: it create like this extra this is a frequency. How many of these little bits show up in a moment is a thing per time, and it's a little harmonic that's on top of stuff that has a texture. That's kind of interesting. See, like I changed the tone of this thing just now, and I don't even know how. And it doesn't matter, because this kind of change, no matter how different it is not going to, it's just that it exists is all that required. Which is why the next few things are what really mattered about like making the tone work across the keyboard. So the time-based thing of having a volume envelope and having this sort of tone phase change envelope on all the notes is great and all, but why does this sound like the right kind of trumpet up here? The right kind of like English horn or whatever down here, and the right kind of trombone down here. It doesn't just work if you set this up in one thing and play the notes up and down. What you have to do is you have to key track stuff. And this is another thing. There's some things that do better in certain directions, like filters, for example. If you track downward with higher notes, sometimes you can save yourself from like the high frequency pains, because you're actually killing off more of them when you play higher. Like that's what that does. And that sometimes that'll feel better than if it just tracked perfectly and you could hear all the right notes all the right time. So in this regard, the thing that I changed was not just the volumes and levels of things, which would mean, so like volume downing on highish notes means less FM, which means a darker version of the sound, which is what we want, because there's a particular property of FM that's devastating, which is that the higher frequency thing is FMing harder just because it's higher frequency, because the higher frequency thing changes the angle of its slope, and the angle of the slope determines the nature of the FM. A higher frequency has a higher slope because it's faster, it's more angular. So that means that the whatever settings you have for one particular pitch and the next octave of it is actually more intense. That particular property is also how it's able to keep like the same sort of like harmonic spread. But all you got to do is, if you turn your FM source up one octave, it doubles your FM spread. It's as though you also turned up the FM like depth by twice. So if you want the same tone but a higher octave, you need to do half the amount in general. So keeping a pitch down, going up on it, something like that helps like this. Of course, this thing used to be a higher frequency, but this is actually this really slow thing. And this is just causing more phase change. Like if you're familiar with the effect you get when you move around the pulse width of a square, this is like just doing that on anything. And that's what that, because if you move phase, it's essentially what you're doing. So yeah, volume, FM, and also the phase of a thing is also key tracked and velocity tracked. So velocity tracking, you heard a lot. There's also, this is all going through a filter, and it's very, very specifically texturally chosen and positioned and like text touched. That's why this mod X exists like this, because I had to nudge it around for certain ones. It's like the damage control parameter, and to keep the tone like kind of where I needed to be. Like I didn't really do the like I described all this physical modeling. Like I had intent, when I started this, but that long like left the window. But by the time I got to where this is, it became mostly about just trial and error, getting the keyboard tracking and the velocity tracking up to just sounding like brass. But also the big part of it is choices like these, and also choices like this. A squeezed in waveform like this is kind of like you bent plus minus it, and it causes it to get a toothy sawish singular event nature versus an even thing that happens twice evenly on the waveform, just flip phase, that has different sorts of effects on things. And brass is a kind of toothy individual event kind of thing. It is has the harmonic series of a saw wave. So that means that my consideration for the kind of FM I'm going to do are going to be based on almost sawish things. And it's basically just the task of getting a saw wave to behave like a brass at the right tone and at the right pitches. That's really all what that FM was about. And then also the unison. You stick around. I actually am going to turn this down and break down what it sounded like before I got to these predicted parameters. I'm just setting the stage for this because the top band choice was this unison setting. Other than it existing, I also use unison index mapping on almost everything. And not so much on these front two guys, but these dudes everywhere. And like I have phase change on the unison. I have volume change, FM change. That's pretty much it, really. Yeah. So the value of doing this is that on top of having multiple voices, pitch spread and phase spread and volume and for panning and that kind of thing, they also have the differences per voice that make them sound like they are actually more than one of the instrument and not just a synthetic multiple. And on top of having done all that, one other thing I'm doing is I'm randomizing the hell out of phase on all of these. And it's not that guy. I am using index machinum. Nope. So I'm randomizing phase. And what else am I randomizing? Volume ever? Not really. Phase is enough. And the reason why is because that's why it sounds different when you hit the note multiple times. And that's also why it'll sound different on all 5 of these voices. It's already phased differently, but these phases are also phased differently per oscillator. So each voice has a slightly different tonal spread that's like as though there are multiple instruments in the same space. And that was the plan there. Let's deconstruct it. Let's turn all the voices off. This is what this sounds like. It's way too loud. See, that sounds way drier and a lot more synthy. This already sounded way synthier because it didn't have the room on it. But that started to sound a lot more just like, oh yeah, that's just kind of a super song happening right now. Just with a filter. So let's talk about the filter situation. This is a high pass filter. And the reason why is because the phase motion reads as low frequency power. And that means after all this is happening, there has to be a bottom cut on it, even though there is bottom based stuff happening. And this is another benefit of the fact that we're using the color system to make our different notes here, because it means each note has its own high pass setting because I key tracked it. The low ones are low enough that the high pass doesn't interfere with the notes that need them to be there. The notes, the harmonics that sound good with it. The high ones have it high enough that that low ass read in power doesn't unnecessarily show up. Same thing with the key on the low pass is set also to be higher and highs so that they don't bleed ours to death with piercing. Yeah. So without the high pass filter, this is what this sounds like. You see that activity up there showing up? Oops. Yeah. Without the low pass filter, this is what this sounds like. I'm doing this right. Here we go. I have to actually keep it like that because it's phased. Yeah, so this is a bit like the guitar and cabinet situation, where the driest of the version of it without the filter that like cuts it up and gives it its texture sounds too papery and damaged. Like, woo! But if we're being real, that's what the inside of a trumpet sounds like. Like, I've put mics up in one and had a person play it. That's what it's like, up to and including the pain. Like, it is some of the loudest. The brass instruments are some of the loudest things ever made, ever. It really, they're kind of that. They're like that. So this activity is expected. So you notice that the FM is doing a really good job delivering that like rip texture, but that actual darkness coming in from reducing its level wasn't really happening so much. And that's really the whole point of the filter. So after that, let's talk about stuff that's happening. Oscillator 6 is just a ring modulator, ring modulating 3, which is doing kind of a lot of work on 2. See how kind of smoother and nicer it got without it on? That's what that guy's doing. And that texture is how high this filter is. It's by the low. So that's like, you just kind of by ear figure out where you like your whip. Let's do number 3, right? And then I didn't do mine. Yep. So that's just on the whole time because I think I have a volume on 6 itself, and that's not doing anything. Neither is this, because the only way you can change ring modulation depth is to change it in the in the target, to use the mod target, and I'm using index mapping, but that's it. Oh yeah, key mapping, that's nice. And the reason this is important is because for some reason, with FM, you can change the intensity by changing the volume, but that doesn't fly for ring modulation. It's just on all the time. And you can change the depth. There is what depth is, but volume does nothing. It's just there. It's always been like that. Never figured out why. Yeah. So, but without it though, that's why it's there. Because this dude moving around 3 sounds pretty okay, but it's not doing enough to 3. So I did that to that. Before I did that though, I tried putting this guy on, which is a higher frequency dude on 4. So 4 is being modulated by a full speed thing. So it's more like this is modulating the phase of this guy while it's FMing this guy by being passed through this. So a little bit, this is like sending a picture through like a water filter, like a water texture filter. Like that's basically what we did to this to make this. And then that effect is applying itself to 3 here. Which is FMing the 2. Actually, it's just FMing 2 because it's phase canceled against 1, and we're hearing the differences between them. Which they were originally this waveform, so like this waveform gets taken out of it, and because it's almost a saw wave, that like closeness to it means that we're getting this like any texture we're hearing at all is extremely motion based and like organic, which is a big reason why this works. This crazy ass waveform is a thing that I arrived to after just extremely random experimentation, and I a little didn't expect it to work. And I also like it's part like this is part of what I like. This sounded kind of more like the type of noisy texture I was trying to get for stringy stuff, but then I noticed that when I did this, it just got brassier and brassier and brassier. Like, oh my god! So like that's why that's how this stuff works. Like I have goals and all, and it's mostly just moving a thing and being like, this is an any % go or like better. And then if it does, it does. If it doesn't, it doesn't. So without 5, which is doing this kind of push in the 4, this is what we get. Now we're hearing it because I'm pretty sure I'm modulating phase on one of these, on both of them. So they're phase canceling each other in weird ways, and then that's causing that this signal is what's going on the filter, and like that's the bass, that's the synth bass that makes this work. I did not start here. This was not my intention. I started with sine waves, and I was trying to do some total other thing. But this is where eventually it got me. And a lot of these choices, like this shape and that thing, were also very like in the moment, like, does it sound better here? Does it sound better here? Does it sound better here? And like when I go to do this again, I know a lot of the things that I won't do. And fortunately or unfortunately, the way I have understood this is because I've experienced most of the don't do. They get here to eventually get it back. Let's hear a total process from beginning to end. now brass. So, moral of the story: when you're trying to make realistic instruments of any kind, is you really want to try and come up with a lot of directions of motion of change that you can hear at once as possible. Because for the most part, you're not really going to hear them at once. It's just the effect of hearing them is this sensation of authenticity, of not necessarily, I don't know how well I nailed an actual brass instrument doing this, but it does still sound like an instrument, doesn't it? It sounds like it exists. It behaves like one. And it does so across the entire spectrum. Which honestly, I'm not writing too many like full ass symphonies or anything like that. So having something like this that does good enough of a job that I can just slap it onto stuff, like band pass it and like layer it into things and make it sound like I have an orchestra in the background, that's awesome. I think I definitely, like, I got a pretty good flute on the way to making this, so I feel like I'm going to try to make some more, though. And the plan that I was originally going to try and do in this phase split stuff was in service to try and make some strings, and if I could figure that out, that'd be great. Just for fun. Like, to be honest, there's already flex brass instruments that you can get for free that, like, are better than this and does the job I just described of being background instrumentation way better than this sort of hackneyed synthesis experiment. But it is interesting and fun to know this kind of information in it. Anyway, this preset, well, actually, this whole FLP will be available in the description of this video. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all of that fun stuff. And as usual, have a nice day.